Hi, friends. Father Kerry here, pastor of Holy Spirit American National Catholic Church, and this is another Holy Spirit moment. This one on Frankenstein's monster and what it has to tell us about spiritual health. One of the most enduring novels of the 19th century is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus. It was a wild bestseller during Shelley's own lifetime, and it has, to my knowledge, never been out of print since it first appeared. It has spawned any number of knockoffs, both in literary form and from Hollywood. Probably there is no one watching this particular video who hasn't seen at least one of the usually abysmal horror movies based upon the Frankenstein story that have been churned out over the years. Now, the usual way of interpreting the moral lesson of the novel is that it is a story of human overreach. That's given away, as it were, by the subtitle of the modern Prometheus, because Prometheus, as you recall, is the Titan, the Greek giant, who stole fire from the gods to give to humanity, and in doing so, somehow ended the separation, the proper separation between humans and gods, and as a consequence was punished horribly for that trespass. Victor Frankenstein, who is the hero of the novel, is a young man who is interested in the natural sciences and who has this great ambition, as he tells us, to not only prolong human life, but to regenerate the dead. He is an idealist who believes that if he can just master the secret of reanimating bodies, that he will provide a wonderful blessing to humanity, the blessing, if you will, of Promethean fire, a blessing that reduces the distance between humans and God. And so he proceeds to do precisely that. After 2 years of intensive, obsessive work, he manages to create a creature who is composed of different body parts of cadavers. And Victor Frankenstein tells us that in order to make his task a little bit more manageable, he has made the creature oversized, 8 feet. You would think then, when the creature is actually reanimated through a rather mysterious process that we aren't really privy to in the novel, that Victor Frankenstein would be overjoyed. But his reaction is an immediate one of horror and repulsion. It is so abrupt, so sudden, that it's likely to leave the reader a little bit bewildered. Frankenstein looks at his creature. He sees his dead white eyes, the thin skin barely covering muscles underneath, the yellow complexion, the shaggy black hair, and he realizes that something incredibly horrific rather than beautiful has been created by his own hands, and he flees immediately. He will spend the rest of his novel trying to, in one way or another, either flee or fight this thing that he has made. He never once refers to it as a human being. He calls it a wretch, a creature, a monster, but he never calls it a human being. Now, it seems to me that the usual way of interpreting the novel, that is, that it is a overstepping of human prerogative that can be traced all the way back to the fall of Adam and Eve, is good and proper. But I believe that there's another moral lesson from the novel that we frequently overlook, and that is just as important. Why does Victor Frankenstein react in the way that he does to this creature whom he has created? Well, I want to suggest to you, because the creature, who remains properly nameless throughout the entire novel, is soulless. This creature is not a human being, because only God creates human beings, and a human being, by definition, isn't a featherless quadruped, isn't a rational animal. It is a creature made in the image and the likeness of God. It is a creature who possesses a soul, and that soul is what animates reason and love and proper desire and everything that is noble and good about human beings. This monster has dead eyes and is grossly physically misshapen as a reflection of its interior cavity, its lack of a soul, its lack of a imago Dei, of an image of God residing within it and animating it. It is not a human, it is a simulacrum of a human. It is a hideous organic robot. The word monster is an interesting one in this context. It is related to the Latin word monstrum, which can mean a omen of foreboding, an evil omen, and it is also related to the verb manere, which can mean to warn. Frankenstein's creation typifies both of those deep meanings of the word monster. It is a foreshadowing of a horrible fate that can befall, and it is a warning that the fate that the monster possesses and exudes is something that we humans ought to avoid at all costs. And yet we find something fascinating about soullessness, don't we? We find something fascinating about creatures who look like humans but really aren't humans. I think that's one of the reasons why zombies have been such a craze, a literary and cinematic craze for the last 10, 15, 20 years. We find ourselves simultaneously attracted and repulsed. Attracted because we recognize that we're looking at something which is bizarre and weird and uncanny, but repulsed because we recognize that we are looking at something which is empty and cavernous and blank and potentially evil. And that's the second thing we ought to keep in mind about the soulless monstrosity that Frankenstein's creature is. This creature is a killing machine. He slays people in the most violent of ways, strangles them. Whenever Victor Frankenstein discovers the bodies of one of his creature's victims, Mary Shelley is always quick to point out that the victim has the monster's fingerprints around his or her neck. A soulless creature is one that has no moral inhibitions or moral compunctions or moral instincts. And that's one of the reasons why a monster is such a foreboding omen. A monster is such a warning about what human beings can become reduced to if we somehow forget that we too are made in the image of God. One final point about this remarkable, remarkable novel. I really do hope that if you haven't read Frankenstein, you will, or if you haven't read Frankenstein in a while, you will return to it. It is well worth perusing and thinking about. Mary Shelley seems not to have had an overtly religious bone in her body. She is married, of course, to Percy Shelley, the wonderful poet who is an avowed atheist, and her parents are two reformers, William Godwin and Mary Wollstonecraft, who likewise had no room whatsoever in their lives for established religion, or really Christianity. And yet, the novel Frankenstein has these undertones, doesn't it, that remind us of Christianity, regardless of which one of the moral lessons one focuses on. If one focuses on the overreaching, the overstepping, which Victor Frankenstein seems to have done when he tries to play God, then we go back to the story of the fall, don't we? When Adam and Eve ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, thereby presuming, as Satan told Eve, they would be like gods. Or if we look at the soullessness of Victor Frankenstein's creature, we likewise have an undertone of religiosity in general and Christianity in particular, don't we? Because the religious perspective on human beings is that we are made in the likeness of God, and that to somehow blemish that likeness, even to the point perhaps of tamping it down to where it's almost non-existent, is a horrible fate to befall any single human being. And what I find fascinating then about these echoes of religion in Mary Shelley's secular novel is this. Even if a culture begins to disbelieve the religious tradition that it held for centuries and centuries, that tradition comes out again and again in disguised ways. And I think that the deep religious sensibility that lies behind Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is one indication of how that religious sensibility simply will never go away. It will merely manifest itself in different and sometimes surprising ways. I really do recommend that you take a look at Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and wonder about what it would be like to so somehow desiccate one's own soul that one becomes more monster than human. I'm Father Kerry Walters, and this has been another Holy Spirit moment. Thank you so much. I will see you soon.